discussion now?
University of Idaho did their own thing.
Because there were like 5 of us who flew to Burley.
Yeah, we've since, and I'm not saying the U of I wasn't supportive, but they had their own system. We since have had some connections with the University of Idaho, and you just did a couple of previous leases in the consent agenda with the U of I. At that time, it was determined that state of Idaho retained a certain number of fibers, city, City, Gritman, Moscow School District all retained a finite number of fibers. It left a huge overage because these were typically 48-strand cables. So we had all this excess capacity. At that time, the telephone company, Verizon, was, I don't believe that the television cable company was providing at that time. But Verizon's rates were huge and they didn't have great service. So at that time, it was determined, we did some research, and some cities, such as Tacoma, Washington, were actually lighting that fiber and selling it to their citizens, service to their citizens. We debated it, the council debated it, and determined that that excess capacity under appropriate conditions could be leased to the public. The folks who were in the business at that time were the internet service providers who could, quote unquote, light the fiber. So the idea was to provide that pipeline out there, public infrastructure, that private business could provide, be the bridge to provide that capacity out to the citizens. The reason that this paragraph says unless otherwise deemed to be appropriate was to provide flexibility. And that flexibility was that the council wanted to retain the right that if an ISP, an internet service provider, was not putting it out there, if you will, and allowing people to access it through their services, that governmental entities or the state of Idaho would be allowed, county of course is a political subdivision as well, would have access to that. But the council wanted to retain the right to look over if anybody else had an idea that they wanted to lease the fiber, which is why that language is in there. That's exactly why we're here tonight.
Right, and I think the discussion was about a public good and public ownership of that. Now, Mike Hall was involved in that. Was he representing First Step Internet at that time, or I can't remember?
Yes.
Yes. So he flew with us, and Walter
Correct.
was there as well. Bill Belknap, B.J. Swanson, representing Gritman, I think, at that time.
No,
That
she
was
LEDC.
for
LEDC.
She was on the advisory council.
Oh,
for
the Governor's
state.
Economic Advisory Council. That's right.
Robin Woods went, I went, you
That's
went,
right.
Hall went. Did Bill go?
Bill went.
Bill was there too. Yeah.
It was Bill's project. He was coordinating all the parties together.
Right.
And we have backup documents for this, agreements with all of those other entities, school district, Gritman, state of Idaho, and the city are all party to that document. The city actually owns the underlying infrastructure, and everybody else has the right under that agreement to utilize a portion of that. So our leasing that excess capacity is entirely allowable under the agreement.
And Sue, you indicated we have some folks
I
here
guess I
tonight.
wanted to ask the Rays if they had any comments, or if they're just
You'd be
observing.
welcome to. Anybody who'd like to speak to this is not a public hearing, but you're welcome to come up to the lectern. We just have you state your name and address or affiliation so we could know that connection, if anyone would like to speak to this.
I didn't know they might be just wanting to observe, but I just...
That's right. We don't want to put anyone on the spot.
Since they speak
but,
the language.
Well, I'm Tony Ray from Cactus Computer and Internet Service. I just had a question. I was wondering, do you know, Jesse, offhand?
And we'd have you speak
Can you
into the
speak into the
microphone
microphone
there
that
so
can't
we
be
can hear
recorded
you. There you
otherwise?
go.
Jesse, do you know approximately how much bandwidth they will be using?
I do not know. I haven't really looked into their utilization requests.
Okay. I was just curious as to how much of the capacity that they would be leasing that they'll actually be using. We provide service to National Instruments over in Pullman, which is a large corporation nationwide. And they only use 5% of the capacity of one fiber. And so that was my question.
So it's
comment.
significant, I'm trying to follow this, is that significant because if a large international company only uses 5% of one fiber, then someone else having exclusive use of one fiber must have a heck of a lot of data, or might
Either
not
that
be using it all?
or is using very little of the capacity, which is more likely the case. The amount of, that they purchase 5% of the bandwidth capacity of the fiber that they're on, and they're not, and we've divided among several different companies, because it actually is a gigabit of capacity. And I was looking at their usage charts just a couple days ago, and they use about 1/10% of the capacity of the fiber.
Who does? EMSI or the?
National Instruments.
National Instruments, okay.
Okay. So the amount that they purchase can be considerably smaller than the capacity of the fiber, and their actual use can be considerably smaller than that. So I remember when we first asked the city for use of the fiber to go from our store to a vault over at the University of Idaho. The big question at that time was, well, the fiber is a finite resource, okay? And so if you had, 48 strands and you had, 50 people who wanted to use it, and at that time you actually had to use 2 strands instead of 1 to connect 2 locations. The fiber would be gone very rapidly and would only be serving a very small number of people. And I think that was the idea behind.
Could you say that again, Tony, please? With that last part that you just said.
Well, the thing is that you would have only a very small number of people serviced by the fiber if each person bought exclusive use to it. And the idea of having the internet providers do it was that they would use that capacity for many businesses, many individuals, each strand of fiber. For example, the strand of fiber we have that goes from our store over to a connection with Zayo Bandwidth. They're a Tier 1 provider in Pullman. That one fiber, we're using about 30% of its capacity, and that's serving over 1,000 people. So I just kind of wanted you to get a picture of how much bandwidth a fiber is. It's a lot. So
Mr. Ray, are you willing to field questions? I know what Councilmember Steed has his finger up here. Walter?
okay.
Did you have a question for Mr.
So is your concern that this proposed agreement would have EMSI tying up unused fiber, or tying up fiber that would then be unused?
That was a concern when we approached the council 5 years ago.
Tonight I'm talking about.
It turned out that was probably not a serious problem. It's still a finite resource, but it's not being used up nearly as quickly as people thought it would 5 years ago.
Thank you.
So I guess my question was, 5 years ago, of course I wasn't on council, but 5 years ago, did you ask to lease some of the city's fiber and were told no?
We were told yes.
Oh, you were told yes, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's,
Because, under the condition that we were going to make it accessible to our customers.
okay.
One other, please.
Sure, go ahead.
Who is the service provider for EMSI in their current location?
I do not know. No.
It has to be either y'all or First Step. Is that possibly
well, it
right?
could be. It's not us. It could be First Step. It could be Frontier. It could be Time Warner.
Okay.
I don't know of any others that are in Moscow.
In the business in Moscow?
That could provide fiber.
Okay.
Okay, it looked like Gary had his hand up there.
Yeah, and Tony makes a good point. When we first put the fiber in, we knew of its capacity, but technology is moving ahead so quickly, as Tony indicated. And back then, 2 fibers were required or preferred. Now single fibers are able to be utilized. The multiplexing capacity, which was, I guess, horrendously expensive in the past, is now a more, not economical, of course, but at least it's an option that can be utilized, and it can give you a lot more capacity on there. I would point out to the council, too, that this is a 3-year agreement. It's been 5 years since that time when Tony was in here. So it's not, if it becomes an issue, then the council in 3 years will be monitoring it. And if in 3 years the capacity is not being utilized, then we have the ability to not renew the lease. And for, EMSI would have to contract with the ISP at that time, picking up service right outside of their door.
So could excess capacity be subleased to others, regardless of who the lease would go to? If there's excess capacity within a single strand?
Not by EMSI, according to the agreement,
No, they
paragraph
can't.
So
11.
that's it, okay.
Good. That's good.
Tom, you had your hand up?
I guess I'm developing more comfort with the issue and understanding and feeling like I'd feel okay about moving forward with accepting the agreement. I guess what I'd like to see us do, perhaps on a parallel fiber, is to re-examine the resolution to make sure that we're up to date with, current technology.
Right.
I mean, I think somewhere in there it referred to a pair, and I just think we need to
Right.
tidy it up and bring it up to at least 2013, if not 2014
Right.
standards or technology. So.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the council, Mr. Ray?
Oh, that's it.
Thank you for coming forward. We
I
appreciate
appreciate
it. Did you have another question?
Someone
for him?
else moved a while ago in case you didn't
Absolutely.
see.
That's right. Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to this tonight?